We'll call the meeting of the Minot City Council to order for today, Monday, November 4th, 2019. I want to say thank you to everybody who is joining us both in chambers here and also online on social media. I would also ask that if you do have a cell phone or any other electronic device to put that onto silent or onto vibrate so that we can keep the distractions at a minimum. Roll call, please.
Janser.
Here.
Olson. Here. Pittner.
Here.
Padragula.
Here.
Straight.
Here.
Wolski.
Here.
Sitma.
Here. We also do have PAC 425, the Webelos that are with us tonight, this afternoon, and are going to help lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Number 3 on our agenda is the mayor's report. As I did mention that we do have PAC 425 here from North Hill for the Webelos that are working on their Arrow of Light badge. So if you could help me welcome our Webelos. Thank you guys for being here. Taking a look at some of my different meetings and activities that I've had through the month of October. Did have the Opportunity Task Force on October 15th, and I think I've got my own, there we go. We did do the Calyx tour on October 15th as well, and a different Cub Scout presentation, MEDC special board meeting on the 16th, the 17th, meeting with Erland Dahl, Norwegian business consultant, and then I did have closing for the Zombie Homes on the 18th. On the 19th, I attended a Minot State University football game where I am proud to say that Minot State University did upset Concordia St. Paul 38-31. I want to say Alderman Padragula and Alderman Janser were there as well. It was a great day at MSU, and I managed to snap a picture that only, I think, had a one little error on the one gentleman's face from the panorama. So it was a great day to be out at Minot State. Thank you to Dr. Shirley for inviting us out. October 24th, we did have the flood buyout meeting, areas 6 and 6A. I was there, as well as I think Alderman Wolski and Alderman Straight were in attendance. On the 25th, I did attend Bel Air third grade class for a presentation on municipal service as the mayor, and then the IEDC steering committee on the 25th too. Then on the 29th through the 31st, I attended the Main Street Summit in Bismarck, and City Manager Barry, along with a number of staff, and I think Alderman Wolski were in attendance as well. Some great breakout sessions. I think a lot of different people took away a lot of different really important ideas from that. I think the main important piece that we took away from the summit is just kind of the energy that is surrounding the redevelopment of communities both large and small across North Dakota. Came back on the 31st on Halloween to help welcome the North Dakota Energy Association that was here in Minot. And then November 1st, MADC development meeting. On the 4th, Minot Public School accreditation team interview. That would have been earlier this afternoon. Aside from that, there were 14 other meetings with city department officials and consultants, numerous other phone calls and emails. If no one has any questions about my report on my different activities, I do have a couple of different appointments that are before you this evening for consideration.
Mr. Mayor, I move your appointments.
Second.
Motion by Alderman Janser to approve, second by Alderman Pittner. Any discussion on the motion? Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Janser.
Yes.
Olson. Yes. Pittner.
Yes.
Padragula.
Yes.
Straight.
Yes.
Wolski.
Yes.
Sitma.
Yes, motion is approved. That takes us to number 4, City Manager's Report.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's November and our first council meeting of the month, so it's my pleasure to give you the November City Manager's Report. We'll go ahead and jump right in with important dates, as we usually do. Here they are in calendar form. We have the Military Affairs meeting coming up on the 7th, Veterans Day on the 11th. Of course, offices will be closed during that time frame. Next city council meeting will be on the 18th, chamber board meeting on the 19th, the state fair annual meeting. For those of you who might be attending, that will be on the 20th of this month. The Magic Fund meeting is scheduled on the 22nd. Planning Commission, of course, last Monday of the month until you entertain a possible change this evening on the council agenda. That's scheduled for the 25th. And then Thanksgiving occurs Thursday, the 28th this month, and of course offices will be closed then. And then the downtown tree lighting celebration will start at 5 o'clock in the downtown on Main Street. So that'll be pretty fun. I want to jump into a couple things here. This project, the ERP, may be something you've heard a lot about over the last several months. And I want to explain it and give you an update as to where we are in this particular project. The Enterprise Resource Planning System, or ERP, software package is essentially a process management software component that will be added into or integrated into our operation, which will allow us to tie and integrate a number of different applications to manage our overall business processes and data information, allow us to update and provide reports and those sorts of things using data analytics more on the fly. This particular endeavor is one that the city operationally, as I've been informed, has not undertaken of such significance probably in decades. This is absolutely an enormous undertaking of the city. This will update a 30-plus-year-old antiquated operational system. And imagine what's happened in the last 30 years as it relates to technology, because that's what we're stuck in right now, and we're going to get out of it. So let's talk about what exactly we mean by this and what we're going to be doing. The project objectives are many. We want to increase user access to real-time system data. We don't have a lot of people that can pull information out of our current system. It's not accessible or available to a lot of folks, and it requires an enormous amount of manipulation. We also want to decrease the number of manual and paper-based processes associated with the data management system, eliminate or reduce redundant data entry, which happens all the time in the existing system. We pull stuff out of this system because it can't compute or process. We stick it into this system. We manipulate it. We get what answer we want. Sometimes we have to go back and plug that into the old system. It's just really cumbersome. We also want to decrease the reliance on staff in the finance department for producing financial data and reports. So this system will be available for all of those who need access to the information that's included within the system. Also, improving workflow processes to find efficiencies and implement systems that provide an integrated ERP application. You're going to hear, and I'll mention it tonight, but over the next coming months, you'll hear about other systems that we will also be integrating into the city's operation, like asset management or fleet management or those sorts of things. Those are all part of an enterprise-wide system integration. And we are using a couple different vendors for each of these projects because some vendors have strengths much better or provide a better product and applications and service than do others. So we have spent enormous amounts of time in committees trying to identify what the projects should be, what the scope of the work is, and the goals and objectives, and importantly, what vendors are out there with various products that can help us advance on each of these different fronts. And I want to thank Alderman Janser for being involved in this particular project, which is primarily financial and HR related, and Alderman Padragula for being involved in our fleet management, asset management, and planning and zoning application, which will be coming to you probably somewhere, if not next month, the following month. Okay, so other intended goals for this first round of this product, again, streamlining processes, ensuring effective training. That's absolutely got to happen. If our people aren't trained on the software, if they don't understand it, they're not going to use it. And of course, that has to be a success criteria. We have to ensure appropriate controls are placed inside the system so that we're meeting not only state, but also ordinance or local requirements and also best management practices. We want to avoid duplication of entry of data, because what happens is now we have conflicts and we don't know which system's right, and then of course that impacts integrity of the systems. And we need a method by which we can track performance and efficiency gains. You know that my goal since coming to the city has been tracking and measuring performance and ensuring that we take appropriate steps to improve what we do to provide the best possible service to our citizens at the lowest possible cost. These systems are going to allow us to do this. So these are the criteria that are listed here for success for us, making sure we have streamlined processes, access to data, real-time analytics, so we're not creating one chart that has a 1 day in time use. It's applicable for the time it's printed. We want data analytics that are on the fly, we can pull up and use at any point in time. We want to provide self-service capabilities to both our staff to free up finance and other data stewards, and also to the employees, so they have easier access to city data that they may want to use in making decisions about their business, about their home, or other sorts of things. We need a properly configured system, accurate data and integration systems, and then of course we have to have end user acceptance, and this is going to be critical of the training component of these systems. That is, in a lot of cases, one of the biggest hangups in the success of these types of rollouts is getting acceptance by our users, and that of course includes the staff that are going to be using and accessing the data, the people going to be putting the data in, the people are going to be running reports, and all of those sorts of things. This is what the two major phases of the project look like. We've just had the kickoff, as I mentioned, on October 17th. So we're starting phase 1, that's the financial systems. It'll be about a year-long project before all of the activities, and I'll share what those activities are going to be completed. Phase 2 will start probably about 6 months from now, in April or so of next year. That's the human capital management system. I'll mention to you what that looks like, and that also has a 1-year-long implementation. Couple things here to keep in mind on phase 1. These are the aspects of the phase 1 project that we're going to be including in that first year's rollout. I do want to mention that we are going to attempt to build next year's budget using this software package. We're sort of crossing our fingers that we can get that aspect of it up and running by May, so that we can begin to use that to put information into and manipulate the information and produce the kinds of data sets that we need in order to inform the budget process. So, bear with us, because it'll be a new process and it'll be a new system for us, but we are intending to do that. What better way to test fire it than while you're rolling it out? Because you'll have the consultants available, you'll have the specialists available that can help us in the event we run out into any problems. So I won't read all the financial aspects of this, but you can see this touches an enormous number of our processes and data sets inside the city. The phase 2 process or project part of this is the human capital management piece. Here's where we're going to be looking at payroll management, human resources and talent management, recruiting processes, and employee self-service for, say, benefit selection and other sorts of things, W-2s, a lot of that kind of stuff that we can pull off the system and hopefully take less time from HR and finance staff in producing some of that stuff. There are a couple other projects that are going to be rolling out as well. Phase 2A is part of phase 2, but starts a little bit later. And this is an execu-time advanced scheduling process component, and then also phase 3, which will start in October of 2020 and take also a year, is the utility billing component. Each of these have different aspects. The scheduling component is going to allow us to do things like online time cards, scheduling of staff, and that doesn't sound really hard if you have an 8-to-5 job, right? I mean, how hard could it be to schedule people? But we have people on all sorts of different types of schedules, whether it's a 24-hour rolling schedule, 11 on, 3 off, whatever. I mean, there's all sorts of schedules, so allowing us to have that integrated into a payroll system allows us better abilities to make adjustments. For example, daylight savings time. There you go. There's one simple hour task that can be a nightmare for payroll. So advanced scheduling and those kinds of things are going to be important in that. And then the utility billing mode, or module rather, is going to allow us then to integrate utility billing aspects of our operation with the financial aspects, both on revenue projections, other sorts of things, and tie those actions that occur at a property, whether it's be turn-offs and turn-ons or count setups or those types of things, and automate all of this sort of stuff and integrate it into our overall financial systems. So we're pretty excited about that. I mentioned to you earlier there are a number of other future phases not included with this first software deployment. These future phases are now what Alderman Padragula and another subset of staff have been working on, and those include 3 modules: asset management, fleet management, and permitting and land development. So, as I say, we are now entering the 21st century. It feels really good. This has been something that has been astonishing to me when joining the city several years ago, and as you know, has been on the forefront of my priorities since I came to the city. So I want to thank you for your support in this work. And now I have to ask you for your patience as we roll it out. But you will be absolutely delighted. Give us a year or two to start showing results, and you will see the absolute benefits and time savings that this kind of system will be able to provide for us, and the service level that we'll be able to amplify on behalf of all of our citizens. So I'm excited about that. Next, I'll move into the NDR component of our operation, as we usually do, talk about NDR updates. The first one to talk about here is the Family Homeless Shelter. That project remains a very exciting project for us. The project has passed essentially two major milestones. The first one is the environmental review, which has been completed. And of course, that allows us then to make a request for release of funds from HUD to actually now pursue the project. So things are looking quite well on the Family Homeless Shelter. I think even when I came to the city first, just a few years ago, I wasn't certain how this project was actually going to manifest itself. We were talking about, kind of a smaller version of what we're going to see with this project, and the synergies that this project includes are absolutely tremendous for our community, because we're not only talking about a family homeless shelter, we're talking about transitional living, about taking people from homelessness and teaching and training them and getting them into situations where then they can become self-sufficient. And that's the beauty of this particular project. So I'm absolutely so excited for all of those who are involved in this project and look very forward to its next steps. The zombie home progress, we just had agreement on 3 more properties, so we continue to whittle down the number of zombie homes that are out there. This has been a priority for our mayor and you council members for some time. That brings the remaining zombie count down to 14 of 35. We're pretty excited about that. The gathering space, as you all know, because you made the decision last month, we did send letters to the Site 2 property owners withdrawing our offers that were initially made and outstanding for almost 9 months. So that paperwork has been filed. We've moved on to Site 1 as directed. The Site 1 property owner has been sent a letter on October the 8th requesting whether or not they're interested in selling, just as we've done with all the other property owners in past site. We haven't had word yet from the property owner as to whether or not they are interested in engaging the city. As we usually do, we give about 45 business days or so for a response. And of course, if we don't get one, then we'll have to come back to you and get your blessing to do whatever's next, which might be taking a different path or proceeding on to Site 3 or whatever it might be. So not a whole lot to report on that. Acquisition-wise, we had buyout areas 6 and 6A. We held a meeting on October 24th, as the mayor alluded to. About 30 folks were in attendance, so it wasn't too bad in attendance. We had about a 1-hour meeting, and it was very cordial. Unlike some of the meetings that I have been told have been occurring, or have occurred rather, in the past. And maybe this has to do with a lot of things. Maybe the city's approach, maybe it has to do with timing, maybe it has to do with a lot of things. But we are definitely wanting to be empathetic in our approach. This is a tough thing for a lot of people in our community, and we need to be treading very lightly and respectfully as we go through these, and those have been the directions to me, to the staff, and I hope that this first meeting is something that we'll be able to continue to see moving forward in the way that we treat people, particularly in these kinds of situations that are largely charged and emotional. So about half the property owners have finished, or they have scheduled an intake meeting, which is actually pretty quick, given we just had this meeting a week or two ago. Let's talk about construction. I have some excellent news for you and the public on construction. Despite the fact that we have been delayed for mostly a month or so in regards to climate changes here, the Phase 1 of flood control project still is about 4 weeks behind, but we have just opened 3rd Street today. So all the barriers and that kind of stuff are down, and the public can move freely up and down 3rd Street, and that will remain at least until next year. So that's good news. Bad news is you won't be able to access Fifth Avenue. The intersection will be open in a few weeks, but only to the east. We will keep it closed all winter long to the west, or westbound. And the pump station, people have probably already noticed, is going vertical, and that's pretty exciting to see as well. As it relates to phases 2 and 3 on flood control, project as a whole is ahead of schedule, which is good news. The curb and gutter has been poured in place on 16th, late in October, and we're letting that cure. And once that cures, we're going to be removing the barriers there, and we'll reopen that, we imagine, hopefully here in the next week or two. Finally, the dreaded Broadway panel replacement project, which was a very, and still is a very important project, envisioned 40 blocks of work from Northwest 20th to Southwest 20th. And that work, we didn't quite get done. We got all the way from Northwest 20th Avenue down, or North 20th Avenue, all the way down to about 15th. We didn't quite make it the last five blocks before the weather got the better of us. And so essentially we'll have to come back and do that work next year. There'll be some temporary closures just as we've done. It should be a lot less impactful because it'll be a shorter period of time and whatnot. But Broadway is now open to 2 lanes again, both directions. There are no barriers or impeding movement or any of that kind of stuff, and we can enjoy that for the rest of the winter. So we're excited about having that. Up next, capital improvement plan. As you know, last year was our first attempt to develop a formalized 5-year capital improvement plan with detail and specifics and rating and ranking criteria and budget numbers and all that sort of stuff. We're in the process of revising that. I know that Lance Meyer, our city engineer, has sent an email out to you all requesting any information or projects that you might have or you want us to look at. Some of you have provided that information. I appreciate that. We'll be putting this plan together, and essentially, as we put the plan together, one of the things we're realizing is that we're not in too bad a shape when it comes to a lot of the municipal projects. If you look at last year's CIP, I think we were pushing something like $415 million, and only about $100 million of that was related to essentially municipal infrastructure. The other remainder was largely related to flood control improvements and the NOS project. So we're going to kind of see that as we move forward in the capital plan. As we develop the plan, here's what it looks like. Projects for inclusion are required to be delivered to Lance on November 13th. On the 17th, the draft report will be issued to council, and that's the 17th of January. Then we'll have a public report that's presented to you all on the 21st and to the public, and I will be taking comments from you and the rest of the public on that. I had an opportunity, moving on, to attend the ICMA, or International City County Managers Association Conference. It occurred October 20th through the 23rd. It was in Nashville this year. It's about 5,500 attendees, one of the largest conferences in their conference history. So that was pretty fun and exciting to be a part of. As you all know, who've ever gone to professional conferences or whatnot, it's great opportunities here to get energized or re-energized, to get reinvigorated, to kind of essentially figure out where we are in relationship to others. So I see these things as therapeutic and informational, right? It's therapeutic because there's always somebody that has a worse story than you, or a worse, comes from a worse environment or a worse whatever. I mean, one of our breakout sessions was dysfunctional councils, right? So every city manager wants to go and attend that, right? Because we all want to know, like, how does our city compare to, like, that city? And I can tell you, man, I am just so fortunate that I have the council that I do, because the horror stories that came out of that thing really was insightful. But aside from all of that, it's really great to see what other communities are doing. There are communities that are just pushing the envelope and just, they're setting the stage and the bar for what civic service is all about. And then there are those that are lagging, and then there's everything in between. And so it's really exciting to be a part of something like this, to gauge where we are, to get inspired on things that could be, and to also help others through things that they've gone through, or things that we've gone through, that they are going through or about to go through. So it's just super exciting. Next, I'll move to an update on the city's task forces. We have 2 that are in operation right now. I mentioned these in the past. We have a buy local preference task force, which consists of 4 chamber members and then 3 city staff members and Alderman Olslin, who sits on the task force, and we're grateful for her participation in this. We've had 4 meetings to date. In these meetings, we've talked about a number of different things, first trying to gain perspective and understanding of, kind of what the issues are and how we might move through them. I think we had a breakthrough meeting, this last meeting, which was last week, where we talked about a number of different ideas and initiatives that the staff are vetting out right now, and the chamber is also working to vet out. I'm excited for our next meeting because I think we'll be able to put that into recommendation and then begin refining that recommendation. And I hope that no more than 2 more meetings will be required, which will put us on schedule before we'll have a report that we can develop with recommendations and then deliver that to you. And of course, the chamber executive can deliver to his constituency as well. So I think things are progressing quite well there. We also have a workforce recruitment task force, and Alderman Pittner sits on this with us, and 7 other staff. Now, this is an internal task force, and it's really geared at looking at just recruitment efforts, the challenges of recruitment, why we don't have as many qualified candidates as we would like to see, and what the impact on our organization is because of it, and what can we do essentially to overcome that. So as you might imagine, this is pretty broad and a pretty big undertaking. So we've spent a lot of time talking about the issues and whatnot. We've had 4 meetings to date. We anticipate probably 2 to 4 more meetings before we have a lot of data and a lot of information. We need to kind of pull this all together. It could take us a while to write the report, so even though we might only meet for 2, 3, 4 more meetings, it could take us a month or more to pull the report together. I wouldn't expect as a council that I could deliver that to you in good faith probably until after the first of the year, just to manage expectations. But it is something that's really important to us, and we have to get a better handle on if we're going to overcome some of the challenges that are coming our way. We do have a focus group that is now been, we've essentially completed our work with. And that was a community engagement focus group that helped us put together a community engagement strategy. This strategy is in its final draft version. It includes 4 key sections inside the document, which identify kind of the purpose, how to engage, how to develop the plan, and a guide for the staff to develop this engagement plan. It also has 5 levels of community involvement. The idea here being that we want to make sure we're clear about what level we want the community to be engaged and involved in. It also describes 3 categories or levels of involvement in each of those community involvement categories. And then finally, it discusses the role of citizens and the role of staff. The key to this work is to consistently apply education and input and involvement strategies for every project we do inside the city, so that we don't have one project that comes off really well and another project that doesn't. We need to standardize the way we communicate and engage with our citizens to ensure that everyone is given an equal opportunity to independent of what the project is, right? So this will allow us as a team to really evaluate what it is we're trying to do in our community, whether it's a project, a program, plans, services, any of those kinds of things, and apply the appropriate amount of community engagement and input that we might seek. So I'm excited. This will essentially go to the department directors here in the next couple of weeks. I'll be looking for their inputs on the final version. We'll finalize that version, and then I'll get the community engagement plan to you, and I'll be looking for your comments and suggestions and all those things, and hopefully we'll finalize it from that and then implement it across the city. Next, the Main Street Summit. I won't go into too much detail here. The mayor mentioned it already. It was a pretty good summit. It was expanded from 2 days to 3 days this year. We had 9 keynote speakers. One thing I found very invigorating is that we had about 20 members of the Minot community go down and participate in this. It wasn't just city staff and elected officials. We had folks from other organizations that were down there, and I found that pretty inspiring. That shows that we have people in our community that want to get engaged, they want to learn these things, and they want to do what they can to make our Main Street and our downtown and our overall community better. There were lots of different topics that were included in the summit. And they were all very good with great speakers and whatnot. So I want to thank the governor and his staff for putting this together. It was quite inspiring. With that, I do lastly have a staff highlight that I wanted to mention. And if I could get the fire chief and also Austin Burns to join me here at the podium, I want to just say a few words about Mr. Burns. And then I know our chief probably wants to say a few words. This is Austin Burns, for those of you who don't know Austin. He's been our training captain for the past 2 years. And the reason I bring him up is because I want to remind the council, and I know you know this, but I also want to remind our community just how awesome of a team and a staff that we have. And Austin exemplifies this. He was recently recognized as the Instructor of the Year by the North Dakota Firefighters Association. He received the award last week, I understand, right? And this is an enormous accomplishment and shows the kind of quality and caliber we have with our employees that do amazing things for us each and every day. Austin has been the training captain, as I mentioned, for 2 years. I got to go see his work, I don't know, maybe a month or two or so ago. They put me up in the burn tower, and I'm glad they asked me to leave before they lit it. That was actually Austin's idea. And I appreciate it. He brings a great energy and enthusiasm to the department, and I'm just grateful for his accomplishment here and in also helping the city look amazing. And thanks for keeping our staff safe and for all the things that you do. Chief, I don't know if you have a few words that you might want to say, or maybe Austin will go.
I think City Manager Barry said it really well. We are very proud of Austin and everything that he's accomplished over the last 2 years. His focus is always to be more professional, and he does bring that energy every day, and I think he's one of the hardest working people in the city of Minot. So we thank him dearly for what he's done. Thank you.
I see Mr. Burns scurried back to his seat, probably doesn't have a whole lot of words to say, right? Actions speak for it all. But anyways, that's all I have for you, council members. I'll take any questions you might have.
Thank you, City Manager Barry. Any questions for Tom? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
That takes us to number 5 on our agenda this evening. That is our city attorney.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, I submitted a written report. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for our city attorney? And if not, anyone out in the public, that written report is attached on the city's website on the agenda within the PDF, so they can take a look at it there at any time. Number 6 on our agenda is the recycling presentation. We did have our input session here at City Council on the last time around, and we are thrilled to have our Assistant Public Works Director back so that we can go ahead and take a look at the deep dive beyond what we have already seen. So good to have you back, Jason.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, council. Yeah, I'll try to provide a little more detail than what's been supplied so far. Dan did a fantastic job trying to put together what I had provided him, but we'll try to fill in some blanks. So just to recall, these are the 4 scenarios that we looked at when we did our feasibility study. We looked at 2 different size material recovery facilities. We looked at consolidation and transfer, and then basically a completely contracted program. And based on the information we got from the feasibility study of a MRF requiring about 20,000 tons to approach a break-even point, I moved on to basically concentrate more on the consolidation and transfer and try to equate that to what it means for fees. When you look at that number of $211 a ton, what does that mean? So we'll step into this a little bit. So we currently have about $1 million, 766,000 and change in community facilities, another 250,000 that we had set aside for transfer station design. So if you take that $1 million and you apply it to that $211 per ton scenario, you basically you bring the capital costs way down and you lower that debt service payment. And then initially, when you lined out all those scenarios, you had to keep things comparative. So there's a labor portion in each one of those scenarios. We think that, at least initially for the first couple years, based on what we're being projected for volumes, that we could operate the transfer station with our current staff level and the equipment that we have at the landfill. So if you kind of draw a line through the labor portion, that $842,000 in annual cost becomes $685, and it comes down to about $172 a ton. So when you take that and distribute it over our current number of accounts, 12,700, it comes to about $450 a month. So that's assuming that the program is mandatory, and then we would swap one collection event per week for recycling. So you'd have either Monday, Tuesday trash, and then Thursday, Friday recycling, similar to that. So I wanted to look at that a little further. There seemed to be a little bit of pushback on a mandatory program from the testimony I heard. So I wanted to look at, what size of program, does it take for this project to kind of pay for itself at a, with a relatively small fee still. So looking at the, as far as capital costs, if we could find a way to not include those in the annual number, if we could use reserves of some sort or something just to basically pay off the capital costs upfront. So then your monthly rate is essentially your hauling costs plus your processing plus your labor divided by the number of customers. So I just did a little spreadsheet, assuming about 400 pounds per person per year. That's kind of an industry standard. Assuming $115 per ton hauling fee, a $10 net processing fee. What that means is when we take material to Minneapolis, they charge us a tipping fee, and then in return, we would get a rebate based on what those materials are worth. So I'm projecting that the rebate is about $10 per ton less than the processing fee. And then I just threw in some labor costs if we would want to hire like a recycling coordinator to help with the education program. And then, like I said, you can see on the screen, it's still a charge of, anywhere from $3 to, $4 or $5 for, this is a voluntary program. And it would still be one collection per week. Another way that this could be rolled out, like I put on the very bottom, it could be a hybrid voluntary program. We haven't talked about this very much, but we could do one recycling event every other week. So for those people that don't want to participate, they still get twice a week collection, 1 week, and then just one collection the following. So I guess I just wanted to bring to your attention and give us some details on the other recycling programs that are going on in the state. The city of Fargo probably has the most successful program that's going on right now. They just switched, I think it was last year, from source separated to single stream. They have a biweekly collection in a 95-gallon cart. They initially had about 15% of their population opt out. But since then, another 10% has come back online. So they're at about 95% participation on a completely voluntary program, which is pretty remarkable, really. They currently charge $3 per month per customer. That's expected to potentially go to $4 in 2020. When I talked to the director down there, they hadn't had their budget meeting at that time, so I could update that number still. They maintain and operate 23 drop sites. Contamination is a huge issue at the drop sites, so they actually hired a full-time person. That's all he does is maintain the drop sites. The director said his main job is that if trash shows up, to hurry up and get rid of it because it has a tendency to reproduce. If a chair shows up, suddenly there's 3 chairs. And so they have a full-time operator that maintains those. They also have a full-time recycling coordinator. They go around and do bin audits, and they help educate the public. The way City of Fargo operates their program is they do all the collection, and then they dump their recyclable material at a place called Minot Recycling down in Fargo. Minot charges them a $99 per ton processing fee, and then they compact it and send it on to Demcon, which is one of the MRFs in Shakopee, Minnesota. Current trash rates, 14, 9, and 6 for the different size containers. What the director told me is what a lot of people have done in Fargo when they opted in for recycling, they just reduced their can size. So in the end, they never did see an increase in their monthly bill. When we rolled out automation, we set our budget before we knew how many people were going to select which size containers. So in order to kind of hedge on the safe bet, we kept our container size prices relatively close. There's only $1.50 between each of them. So this is a program that we could probably model ours after. We could adjust our monthly fees so that the people that do want to recycle could back off on that container size and potentially see an equal or a much smaller increase. City of Grand Forks, they do biweekly collection. Their program is a little different. They have 18-gallon tote, or you can use your own up to 33 gallons. The collection is done by Waste Management. Waste Management has their own transfer facility in Grand Forks, so they collect it, they transfer it at their own facility, and then they transfer it to their own MRF in the Twin Cities. And then as part of that program, Grand Forks doesn't get any revenue share from the materials then. They operate 3 drop sites for source separated, but even with source separated, they have huge issues with contamination just at maintaining those 3 sites. Residential participation is estimated about 40%. Single-family residents pay $18.16 per month for weekly trash and biweekly recycling. We've requested some information from Grand Forks. I haven't seen exactly how all that breaks down between how much is recycling and how much is regular trash. So I can't provide a lot of info between what's behind that number. And then the City of Grand Forks, they self-perform their trash collection. City of Bismarck, they also have biweekly recycling collection, 96-gallon cart. Recycling collection performed by Waste Management. They charge the city $5.54 per account. The City of Bismarck owns a baler building, and then they in turn lease that. They don't use it anymore. It's for their landfill, and they don't use that, so they lease it to Waste Management to use as a transfer facility. So there's some offsetting costs that go on with this. And then Waste Management hauls to their Twin Cities MRF again. So residential rates for Bismarck, $13.61 for trash, and then $18.01 for trash with recycling. They allowed, when they rolled their program out, they allowed a one-time opt-out. So once a house is sold, the new owner was required to take on recycling. They don't know what their participation rate is currently, but they are collecting about 4,200 tons per year, which is based on what I've been seeing from other communities, a pretty good amount of material that they're collecting. They used to have drop sites, I think probably at least 6 or so around town, and due to contamination, they got rid of all of them, and they have one basically right inside the front gate of the landfill, so they can try to keep a closer eye on it. And then their contract is up for renewal, so they obviously have some concerns about what that recycling number is going to become next year. City of Dickinson would be the newest program going on in the state of North Dakota. They just started October of last year. They do biweekly recycling, once a week trash. They do not accept glass in their recycling container. Dickinson performs both the trash and the recycling collection. Here's another situation where Dickinson had a facility, so they did an addition to it, and they added a conveyor and a compactor, so they could do all this on their own, in their own facility. Dickinson's program is mandatory, probably the only one in the state that's mandatory, really. Customers pay $17.25 per month for trash and then an additional $4.25 for recycling. Then they're also charging additional $3 per ton for tipping fees at the landfill to offset some of the additional recycling costs. Dickinson also has a full-time recycling coordinator. Initially, when they started their program, they had pretty high contamination levels. And when you take your material to a MRF, that's each load is basically graded, so you get less of a rebate if you have high contamination levels. So their coordinator has done a fantastic job, and they now have contamination less than 5%. It's actually below the national average when you look around at other successful programs. Just to show you, we got City of Dickinson shared, kind of what their numbers look like. So they collect about 4 to 5 tons per day in Dickinson. They have 2 compactor trailers. They hold about 15.5 tons. A full trailer costs about $2,000 to $2,200 to transport to Minneapolis. And then Demcon is where they're taking the material to, and they charge a $64 per ton processing fee. So if you look at the graph down below, for the first, 10 months of the program, the rebate they were getting was actually more than the processing fee, so they're actually getting some revenue back. But then in May of this year, that all went upside down, and now they're paying, I think it's about a $4 differential there for the processing fee versus the rebate. I did hear some of the conversation. I had some meetings with Borgie prior to you guys meeting with her a few weeks ago, and we talked through some of this. So just some considerations if this is something that the council's interested in. It does eliminate the need for the capital cost for the transfer facility, the compactor trailers. It eliminates the shipping costs. But then it takes us back to a source-separated collection, which generally has a much lower participation rate. This would require basically an independent utility separate from our automated collection trucks. Source-separated collection would require some sort of a compartmented truck. This is similar to the program that Fargo just got away from. So this would be additional trucks, additional drivers, and then routes independent from our regular trash routes. We'd be back to potentially some loose garbage at the curb, depending on how we decided to do containers and things of that nature. Calyx is pretty limited in like some of the plastics that they take and some of the materials they take, which I'm afraid is going to lead to some pretty high contamination rates without a very robust education program that goes along with this. And just to point out, nationally, single stream is still the direction the industry is going, and it's really all due to worker safety. Refuse and recycling collection is still the 5th most dangerous job in the U.S. I wanted to talk a little bit about recycling markets. Some of the testimony I heard from a couple weeks ago, there was some information provided that I didn't feel was very correct. There was a comment made that recycling, there is absolutely no market for these products, and that couldn't be further from the truth. These recycled materials are in high demand. The problem is that if you take your single source container bin, about 80% of that bin is paper, plastic, and cardboard. When China imported or implemented its import bans, that took away 50% of global demand. So what we have is a huge glut of supply for all these materials in the country, and there aren't enough processors locally to process it. So it's dirt cheap for them to buy, and there's a huge amount of supply for it. So that's why the prices have plummeted right now. It's supply and demand. But currently there are some things happening. When China did this, one of the reasons that they did this was instead of bringing all of our potential recycling and our garbage to China, they wanted to develop their own domestic supply. They have 1 billion people that use products. They kind of looked at this holistically and said, why are we bringing this stuff from across the ocean when we have all kinds of people here that have these materials as well? So what they've kind of taken a change now, and they're actually investing in domestic infrastructure here in the United States. They've bought some processing plants. They're going to build some more processing plants. They're committing about $500 million to U.S. infrastructure to help create or help eat up that supply chain. And then there's another $3 billion in some planned domestic investments with private enterprise, which should also increase demand. This information is coming from a couple of professionals in the waste industry. They own the MRFs in Minneapolis, so I've talked to a couple of them. The one guy said recycling prices have always been cyclical. He said if these prices don't rebound, he said this would be the first time in the last 40 years since recycling has come about, that prices haven't rebounded. He said they've always been up, they've always been down, but they generally always cycle back around. So they think there may be a 2 to 5 year lag here until some of this domestic demand gets into place and, kind of equalizes the ship a little bit. There was some talk about, the program could pay for itself with landfill savings. And this is a really hard number to get at. So I sat down with one of our landfill consultants, and we kind of threw some numbers around. So these are the numbers that we came up with. So if you assume that we have a recycling program that collects about 2,000 tons of recycled material a year, so when we always talk tons, but now when you go to the landfill world, it's not tons. We talk cubic yards. It's all about airspace. So 2,000 tons of single stream recycling is about 12,000 cubic yards. One of our large cells at the landfill holds about 640,000 cubic yards of waste. So based on that number, it takes about 53 years to divert the equivalent of one MSW cell, which an MSW cell costs about $1.5 million. So if you spread $1.5 million over 53 years, it's $28,000 a year. It's a relatively small number. There's some factors in here that obviously aren't being taken into account. There is, the land that you're building the cell on has some value. The 2,000 tons a year that you're, diverting, you're not spending fuel to cover. They're just really hard to get to those, really minute numbers and minute factors. So I just wanted to show you some of that info. And with that, I would stand for questions.
Thank you, Jason. Questions for our Assistant Public Works Director? Alderman Wolski.
One question, Jason. What do we do as the city internally for our own organization? Do we do any type of recycling, or is that sort of a hodgepodge across different departments and different practices?
Mayor Sitma, Alderman Wolski, I would say it's probably a hodgepodge. Out at Public Works, we do some paper. There's probably some tin cans that are collected from the pop machine. I believe City Hall does paper. As far as the other departments, I couldn't tell you. It's a hodgepodge.
And do we use calyx then, largely?
Yeah.
Alderman Straight.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Jason, do you see a scenario where we would collect and recycle glass in any scenario? It doesn't seem like we would, right?
Mayor Sitma, Alderman Straight, based on the information that I'm hearing from the people in the industry is that glass is just so cheap to make with raw materials. And it's the places that can get their hands on recycled glass without shipping it across the country use it. It's good to make glass out of recycled glass. It's a huge savings on resources, but you eat up any benefit by trucking it, any distance at all, really.
Thank you.
Jason, I had one question that was actually asked to me after the input session, and that was in terms of footprint. Not necessarily out at the landfill, but on the carbon footprint of recycling. The question that was posed to me is how much diesel, here again we have to make some really big assumptions, even if we were to look at a 70% or a 40%, whatever that number is, participation rate, how much diesel per year would be needed to get our recyclables to Minneapolis?
Mayor Sitma, that's a great question. I'd have to put pen to paper and look at that. I know the EPA has some, kind of like environmental footprint calculators. So they break out equivalencies, X amount of gallons of diesel is equivalent to X amount of pounds of carbon. And I've asked that very same question of like DEMCON, they're collecting recyclables from, at one time, I want to say that they were collecting recyclables beyond Minot out toward like Regina. I'm like, how does this make sense? It seems like whatever savings there is, but he said when you start breaking down the numbers, yes, you're burning diesel. But when you look at it from the natural resource standpoint of all the savings and resources that those materials contain, there's still an environmental benefit.
Thank you. Alderman Padragula.
I had three questions. I guess first of all, I was a little confused in your and I appreciate the overall clarity of the presentation. It's my confusion, not your lack of clarity. You mentioned that several cities had curbside pickup, and you also mentioned they had collection sites. Do these operate in tandem then?
Yeah, Mayor Sitma, Alderman Padragula, yeah. The collection sites are part of the city's program, and they have, different trucks that pick up the containers for recycling from the drop sites, just like they have, it's just bigger dumpsters, things of that nature at the drop sites.
So if a business or a private person wanted to take a large quantity or a bulky material, they could take it directly to one of these sites?
Certainly could, yeah.
Okay, thank you. The second question I had was, with this single stream, you mentioned that there'd be difficulty, or at least not be possible, to work with Calyx. And I'm just wondering if there's some way, we could combine a single stream and maybe do some sorting to help Calyx out or contract with them. The reason I mention that is that they've had a successful recycling program for many years. It's one that not just recycles, but provides very valuable job training opportunities for people with developmental disabilities. And I would hate to see them get out of the recycling business. They're their own organization, but would it really be impossible to coordinate with them and use some of their expertise and facility and staffing and yet at the same time do single stream?
Mayor Sitma, Alderman Padragula, my understanding, I guess when I read the letter that Ms. Beeler provided, I think item number 2 was that they had no interest in single stream recycling. So there might be a way, but they don't seem interested in going down that path at all. They would need to invest in some capital infrastructure of their own. Sorting facilities, unless you're going to do a completely hand-operated facility, they're pretty complex, very mechanically intensive facilities, conveyors, and different machines for sorting different materials. So there'd be some pretty significant capital input on their part to make a program like that get off the ground.
Thank you. And the final question I had was twofold. I just want to make sure I clearly understand the costs. We're talking about $1 million a year, or excuse me, $1 million to get started with this facility, and we have that money saved away, put away. So $1 million to get started, and then we're talking about how much a year if we had mandatory recycling.
Mayor Sitma, Alderman Padragula, so it's basically about $2 million in capital costs, and we currently have $1 million set aside. And then what was the next question?
What would be the cost of the program on a yearly basis, assuming we had all 12,000 accounts and
That would be that number right there,
which is
$685,000.
okay. Thank you.
Alderman Chancellor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Jason, I just want to be clear. So this, what we're talking about here is a residential program. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So this doesn't in any way address all of the commercial businesses and what they're doing. Is that accurate?
Mayor Sitma, Alderman Chancellor, you're correct. Currently, we don't do any commercial. The city of Minot doesn't provide any commercial service. So this program would be implemented just for the city of Minot customers.
Basically homes.
All residential, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Alderman Pittner.
Thank you, Mayor. Jason, just one quick question to the $450 a month. And I may have misheard, just you said for the first couple of years, we feel like that would be an appropriate number. Do you see that number going up or down after that? How do you see that being affected? And obviously price will dictate that somewhat, but what are through your research, what do you feel we'll see with that?
Mayor Sitma, Alderman Pittner, like I said, when we originally did those cost comparisons in the feasibility study, we had to include those labor numbers in there to make sure that each of them was being accounted for. But when we look at it, it doesn't really require a lot to operate a transfer facility. Basically we're just dumping material on the ground, take a loader and push it into a compactor, it compacts into a trailer, and then we contract somebody to haul it away. So at least for the first couple years, we feel that until we got our hands around it and saw how much actual volume that we were going to get, that we could do it with existing labor and equipment. There would be, I would recommend, if we go down this road, that a coordinator be hired at some point due to the importance of trying to get as clean a waste stream down to Minneapolis as possible. So that would be a number that would have to get plugged in there as well. But I think initially our existing staff could cover that.
Alderman Olson.
If we chose to start recycling, what would be an estimated timeline before we would be able to offer this service?
So Mayor Sitma, Alderman Olson, if you told me tonight, go, so we'd have to do an RFQ, get a consultant and an architect on board. We'd have to design a transfer facility. We have to find a place for it and then construct it. So that would take us, just the design portion, I think would take us probably into next spring. It's not a real complex facility to build. I think it could probably be completed building it in, probably the latter part of 2020. Based on what I saw when we rolled out automated garbage and getting carts distributed, I would never do that in the middle of winter. So we'd build the facility, let it sit there, and then probably roll it out the spring of 2021 would be like a June 2021. That's, like I said, that's if money wasn't an object and we just went.
Thank you.
Alderman Pittner.
Thank you, Mayor. Just to follow up maybe to your comment, as far as building a site, with this type of site, is there no possibility of using existing property that could be retrofitted to this use, or is it unique enough to where it needs to be built?
Mayor Sitma, Mayor Sitma, Alderman Pittner. No, it's basically just either a precast concrete, basically an open large garage with a lower level where you can push into. So it doesn't have any necessarily, our existing landfill, there aren't great places to locate it because there's a lot of, old piles of fill, and our existing facility, now that we've got the 2 additional quarters, there would be some places there, but we just went through some pretty contentious dialogue on how much of those quarter sections we're going to use. So I guess before I made any assumptions, we'd probably have to put some things on a map and see what makes sense for these facilities to get located on some of that land.
Any further questions for our Assistant Public Works Director? Alderman Patagula.
This may be going way beyond your area of expertise, but what I keep coming back to, and again, your presentation and what we had last time really clarified things, but what I keep coming back to is this notion of what's the best way to spend $2 million to start with and essentially $750,000 a year afterwards indefinitely in terms of dealing with improving the environment and making sure we don't pollute it and mistreat it and desecrate it as much as we're doing now. Do you have any sense where recycling of municipal residential garbage fits into that? If we're talking about spending this kind of money, is this the most efficacious way to spend it? Is this the most cost-effective way to spend it?
Mayor Sitma, Alderman Padragula, yeah, that's definitely out of my wheelhouse. I would imagine that some environmentalists somewhere have kind of laid that out there. There must be some information somewhere, but I don't have it.
Thank you.
Seeing no further questions, thank you, Jason. I appreciate the information and the hard work that you put together on this over the last number of years now. And before we really get rolling past the section here into the Planning Commission, I would just lead into this. We have had about 100 or so different people over the course of the last, let's say, 6 months that have weighed in either in person or via email or phone calls that we could put down onto paper, at least from my experience, that we take the next 3 weeks and mull over all of that information and come back here early December and address this on what direction that we're heading with recycling, because that would still give us enough time. I think, as Jason had indicated, if it is going to move forward, there is going to be lead time in the process to get it started. And at that point, I think it's going to be the decision then on what direction that we're heading. If in fact that the council is going to make the decision, or if it's going to be made in another avenue. Alderman Straight.
Mr. Mayor, I'm wondering if we couldn't provide a little more guidance to staff, just because of these conversations, of a couple of options or thoughts that probably each of us has that might provide a little clarity, instead of having them to try to have to guess what we're thinking. I just was curious what you thought about that, sir.
I think of the concept of the possibilities is we have only a small handful of them from what Jason had kind of pointed out. I would strongly suggest if you're truly mindset on one of them or something to bring forward for discussion and or negotiation during that time period, I would say get a hold of Jason in the next couple of weeks and have some really in-depth discussions with him, and even with some of the other folks that are reaching out to us on their own thoughts. Because at the end of the day, what we have, I think, identified as being the best source of productivity when it comes to recycling is high participation, if in fact we go that route. So what is it that's going to lead to, I think, the best outcome if the council does decide to move forward? So if that, the presentations are available on YouTube, take a look at those different options, have those discussions with Jason, and I would ask our city manager then to look for that first council meeting in December to bring this back for the big discussion of where we're heading with recycling. Alderman Patagula.
In terms of giving us information, I know that it takes time and energy and money to get some consultation, expert opinion, but I'm wondering if there's any way we can get the proverbial quick and dirty input from somebody who has expertise in terms of overall environmental strategies for cities, small cities in the northern Great Plains. I can't help but think that there's some research institute connected with some university around here where some unbiased, objective scientist could give us a list of, what are the 10 or 30 things that you can do to deal with these issues, and where does recycling, municipal single stream recycling, which is my chosen option, where does that rank? I just am not sure. It's a very technical, very arcane field, and what I'm still struggling with is this the best way to spend the money? I just don't quite know that yet. And before I can choose an option, I personally would like to have a little bit of information, a little bit more. This isn't an attempt to, quote, kick the can down the road or anything like that. But I just want to know where recycling, according to the expert opinion, is, where that stands in the larger stream of things or scheme of things. And one reason I bring this up is that at Hoostfest I had discussions with a couple from Seattle who pointed out that their municipal power and light company is spending a lot of money going around and installing LED light fixtures in every home that they service. We hear about things like planting thousands of trees. We hear about all sorts of things, not using plastic straws. And I'm really at a loss to figure out what the best way to deal with this problem. I think it's a serious problem. I think we need to act. I'm almost there in terms of recycling, but I just want to know, and I'd like somebody who has this expertise to give us a quick read on it. That's all I'm asking for. And I'm wondering, turning to Tom, if there's any way we could get something within a reasonable time frame. And we're not talking about an extensive report or study, but just some outside validation that, yes, this does make sense, or, gee, maybe you should hold off a little bit and try these other things first.
Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Alderman Patagula, I really appreciate your question, but you're not going to like my answer, I don't think. We could try to hunt for someone like you're talking about. There is lots of data out there that exists as it relates to the value of certain types of environmental or sustainable initiatives. I've worked in the Seattle area for almost 10 years. I started my public works career there, and the recycling coordinator was my neighbor, and we were doing environmental programs and those sorts of things. And you're right, Seattle does lead the way, and as does many other cities in the Pacific Northwest as it relates to environmental initiatives. There are a number of different things like water conservation initiatives, recycling initiatives, the light exchange, the low-flow toilets and the low-flow washers and dryers, and I think it depends on your perspective what you're looking at. If you want to measure success by reducing a carbon footprint or a green footprint or impacts to water quality or sustainable aquifers, or it's so different, and everybody does a different thing for a different reason, and without having that, it's going to be really difficult to put all of those environmental initiatives into one and say this one's the best one, you should start here. Some of these things are costly. I can tell you when I worked for Bellevue Public Utilities, and we spent enormous amounts of money giving people rebates for taking out a toilet. We give you $50 to your next toilet just to pull this one out and put a low flow one in there. And of course the time for recuperating that investment is long. There's those types of things that are just going to be so difficult to try to quantify. And I think until we as a staff have, what is the measure? What's the yardstick here? Is it carbon footprint? That might be a little bit easier for us to say, okay, this activity has this carbon footprint, this activity has this carbon footprint, this activity has that. And I can think of anti-idling for an example. I've been a part of anti-idling and low emissions vehicle fleets. Those have a carbon footprint impact, but they have a different cost. So it gets really complicated really quickly, and I don't mean to be vague about the answer, but it's very difficult to sort of put one above another and say, let's start here. Depends on what we want to, what's our goal, I guess.
I thought, thank you.
Alderman Wolski.
Mayor Sitma, thanks. Just some brief comments here. One, I think taking the time is prudent. We heard from Jason that the best case scenario, we're looking at a spring 2021, and that isn't going to change tonight or 3 weeks from now. So I think it makes sense to just take a little more time. I think we've heard definitively that however this goes about, it's going to be user subsidized. One of the questions that I pulled out of this conversation tonight that I think we all need to be thinking about is voluntary or involuntary. That seems to be one of the very key points to pick up on. As a request to staff and more likely to Mr. Lakefield, who might be surprised to hear his name here, but I would like to do a little history research and the viability of perhaps using the Magic Fund to support recycling-related activities. I think there's a little bit of a precedent for that in the past, but I'm not sure if our changes over the last year in that arena would still make that type of an investment viable if we were to go down a road with a Calyx partnership and perhaps trying to find a way to help some private haulers get off the ground. So I'd just like to have an understanding of that, if that's available to us or viable. And then the other thing that I find myself thinking about quite a bit is how do we support businesses and get businesses involved in this as well? Because I think that's a key ingredient in terms of the viability of the whole program. So I just wanted to share some thoughts based on what's starting to roll around based on tonight's information and all the past conversations.
Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to, I'll get to second things, but just for the purposes of saying it, I'd like to second what Alderman Wolski said, because that is going to be very helpful to the staff. If we know that your intention is to go voluntary or involuntary, that changes the equation. As you know, and as it's been presented, the more people that participate, the lower the cost overall. To that end, you may also want to ask yourselves, do you want more than Minot residents to participate? We serve 6 counties. And I know that gets difficult really quick, and that may complicate or the approach going forward. But maybe there's a surcharge for those that don't recycle if you do make it mandatory. And there's those types of things that also need to be considered, because the higher the volume, the less costly it is for everybody. And of course, the bigger the environmental benefit. So at least that's the thinking behind it. And I think that would be another important question to be mulling over, if you will, for our next meeting.
Alderman Olson.
Mr. Mayor, I do hope that over the next 3 weeks, when we hear from people, that we also hear if they want us to make the decision or if they want to have a voice in it, perhaps in June 2020 when we have an election. I've heard a little bit of talk about that, and I'm curious to know how they want this decision made.
Very good point, Alderman Olson. Alderman Straight.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, just for transparency. I'm coming around to being extremely supportive of a voluntary program. We've been told for the last number of years that this is a young community with young families, and I think back to the 1980s when we had this big, as I was growing up in the 80s, we were having this conversation about the brain drain, and many of us left, and many of us are now living here, and we've been told, we're behind the times. And so I'm of the mindset that I'm for the young people of this community to drive this, and for them to prove that we can get many, many people on board, and it can happen over time, and it can grow, and it can start small, because like Alderman Padragula and our city manager, we've got huge challenges. We're not going to solve them all overnight, but I'm not for kicking it down the can down the road. I'm not for putting it back to the voters. I think if people want to do it, let's figure out from the city standpoint of how to allow them to do it. And if the other public doesn't want to participate, then I'm not going to punish them and force them. I have a hard time doing that, but that's my line of thought, sir. So for what it's worth.
Thank you. Likely we will have a very lengthy discussion in that early December meeting. So with that in mind, let's not belabor tonight's meeting. Let's move on to number 7 here with consider the report of the Planning Commission. They did have 10 different items on their agenda, and several of them, 3 I believe, were public hearings. Are there any other specific items that we would want to pull for individual discussion out of the remaining 7? Alderman Wolski.
Mr. Mayor, I've got, and I don't know whether these are public hearings or not, but I've got item 7.5, the Bluffs 12th edition, and the 7.8 rehab services rezone. I expect that is a public hearing.
That one is a public hearing,
Yep.
correct. So we have 7.1, 7.2, 7.6, 7.7, 7.9, 10, and actually 11. There were 11 items, I apologize. That is the meeting schedule there. Does anyone have any other items that they want pulled? Should we pull number 11 for the meeting schedule, Mr. Billingsley?
Member Sitman, members of the council, I recommend you pull 710. There is a memo written this morning by building official Mitch Flanagan and Fire Chief Cronchonable. They are recommending that a fire suppression system be placed in the proposed group
Okay.
home on
We will
4th Avenue
pull-
Northwest.
We'll pull that for individual discussion.
Yes, and if you choose to approve this item, I recommend that you add a condition to 7.10, giving the applicant 60 days to install the said fire suppression system.
Okay.
Thank you.
7.10, thank you, sir. So we have 7.1, 7.2, 7.6, 7, 7.9, and 7.11 remaining.
I'll move those remaining items.
Motion to approve by Alderman Janser. Is there a second? Second by Alderman Pittner. Discussion on the motion to approve the remaining items that I had just described.
Mr. Mayor,
Alderman Wolski.
hate to be a pain, but 7.9 is intricately tied to 7.8, and it might seem presumptuous to put one in front of the other.
7.9 is pulled. Is that okay with the motion maker?
9 is pulled, yes.
And the second? Okay. And for those who are following along, either here or at home, that means we're making a motion here to pass as forwarded from the Planning Commission with their recommendations 7.1, 7.2, 7.6, and 7.7. Any further discussion on the motion to approve? Please call the roll.
Janser,
Yes.
Olson,
Yes.
Yes.
Padragula,
Yes.
Straight,
Yes.
Wolski,
Yes.
Sitma.
Yes, motion is approved. That takes us back to 7.3. This is a public hearing. The rezoning of the Bluffs 11th edition, a public hearing to consider the request by the Minot Golf Incorporated DBA Minot Country Club to rezone an unplatted portion of the southwest quarter, northeast quarter of Section 6, 15482, containing 2.98 acres to be known as the portion of Lot 1, the Bluffs 11th edition, from the Agriculture District to R1 Single Family Residential District. Again, this is an opportunity for anyone in the audience to come forward and speak, either in favor or against the proposal that was forwarded to us from the Planning Commission. The recommendation is to give a do pass ordinance for the rezone. Last opportunity. If not, I would look for a motion.
Move approval.
Motion to close the public hearing and approve?
The item. Thank you.
We have a motion by Alderman Pittner, second by Alderman Straight. Any discussion on the motion? Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Pittner,
Yes.
Padragula,
Yes.
Straight,
Yes.
Wolski,
Yes.
Sitma,
Yes.
Janser,
Yes.
Olson.
Yes.
Motion is approved. 7.4 is another public hearing, the annexation of the Bluffs 11th edition. A public hearing to consider the request by Minot Golf Club, might look familiar, DBA Minot Country Club, to annex into the city's limits of Minot an unplatted portion of the southwest quarter, northeast quarter of Section 6, Township 154, Range 82 West to the Country Club lot. The recommendation from the City Council is to pass an ordinance that was forwarded by the Planning Commission. Again, this is another public hearing to either speak in favor or against. Again, one last opportunity to come forward and speak for or against the motion, the rezoning. Alderman Olson.
Mr. Mayor, I move that we close the public hearing and move the item.
Second. Motion to close the public hearing and to move the item by Alderman Olson, second by Alderman Alderman Straight. Any discussion on the motion? Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Olson,
Yes.
Pittner,
Yes.
Padragula,
Yes.
Straight,
Yes.
Wolski,
Yes.
Sitma,
Yes.
Janser.
Yes.
Motion is approved. 7.5 is not a public hearing. This is the Bluffs 12th edition replat. The recommendation to the City Council approve the request by Mike, believe it's a Redder, to combine lots 28 and 29 and 30th, Bluff 7th edition, into two lots to be known as Bluff 12th edition, lots 1 and 2.
So moved.
Motion by Alderman Walski for approval, second by Alderman Janser. Discussion, Alderman Walski.
Mayor Sitma, thanks. A brief comment here. One, I'm going to support this replat mostly because we have no grounds to deny it. But I did want to call attention to the council in terms of what I believe is a financial consequence of this. One of the topics that was front and center at the Main Street convening over the past week was the fact that, especially in these greenfield developments out on the edge of town, the revenue generated from property tax is largely not enough to support the service that exists in these areas in terms of maintaining the streets, in terms of supporting the infrastructure that's underneath. And so we have an example here of where we're even further consolidating these lots so that they will produce less revenue. Once again, we have no grounds to deny this, but I think it's a financial implication for the city that we just need to be conscious of as we move forward with land development practices.
Any further discussion? Motion is to approve. Please call the roll.
Wolski,
Yes.
Sitma,
Yes.
Janser,
Yes.
Olson,
Yes.
Pittner,
Yes.
Padragula,
Yes.
Straight.
Yes.
Motion is approved. That takes us to 7.8. We are back to a public hearing. The rezone of Blaisdell Bird Edition, Lot 23-724, Block 13. This is a public hearing to consider a request by Rehab Services, Inc. to rezone the Blaisdell Bird Edition lots 23 and 24, Block 13, from C1, Neighborhood Commercial District, to R2, Two-Family Residential District. The recommendation is to pass the ordinance to rezone the above property as mentioned. Again, this is an opportunity for anyone to come forward and speak in favor or against the proposal that is before us? One more time. If you would, please state your name and address for the record for us, sir.
Kevin Straits, 432 19th Street Northwest, just north of the property. The reason there's a couple of us here came is that there were a couple different issues that we're seeing with this. We're bringing into our neighborhood residential or short-term living place, and very few of us were actually informed. I actually just found out last night due to how it's set up. It's only 300 feet from the building. I'm just outside of that, so I wasn't aware, but another neighbor was talking to him and found out. We just don't think it's a positive thing to have that type of establishment with our families right there, with all our kids in the neighborhood. Now we have to be aware of not sending our kids down that direction because we're just not sure what might happen or what type of people are going to be in this facility.
Any questions for Mr. Straits? Thank you, sir. Again, this is a public hearing for anyone to come forward to speak in favor or against. Good evening, Mr. Peterson. If you would, your name and address or affiliation for the record, please.
Terry Peterson. I'm Assistant Director at Rehab Services, Inc.
Yes.
Hi. Mayor Sitma, Council. Just wanted to say a few words to maybe answer some questions preemptively and then stand for questions after. Briefly, who we are. We're Rehab Services, Inc. We're a 501c3 nonprofit. We began in 1988 serving people with disabilities in the Minot community. We began addiction services within the Minot community in 1993 with a partnership with North Central Human Service Center. We currently have our license to provide addiction treatment services in the city. We have a long-standing and good relationship with North Central Human Service Center. They came to us. They're mandated to have a certain number of beds to provide addiction treatment to individuals, outpatient, inpatient, and outpatient, actually. And they came to us to help fill that need in the community. This building, we looked at a lot of sites and came across this one, and it seemed to fit really well for what we're doing. And I'd like to thank Mr. Flanagan, Mr. Lang, for their help in navigating some of these code issues that came with the purchase of the building. A lot of them were existing before we bought it. I also wanted to mention that as a nonprofit in the community, we laid out the capital to purchase this building and do any renovations necessary and go through, in this case, a rezoning just to make sure that we're in compliance. We have a building application ready to go into the city tomorrow if approved, which includes a privacy fence on the north side and west side. And we're also prepared to, comply with anything we hear back from the city in accordance with that building application. I would like to mention that this is more of a transitional facility for individuals who are still undergoing addiction treatment, but are 6 weeks at least sober and in compliance with their addiction treatment plan with North Central Human Service Center. This is a staff facility, 24/7. There's security cameras. There is also and I looked this up before I came, a 65-page handbook with rules and regulations that individuals need to comply with. We're here to support them in their treatment to beat their illness, and we do that in conjunction with addiction case managers at North Central Human Service Center. I'm sure that there's other things I missed, but I'll keep it at that.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. There was a substantial amount of discussion at the Planning Commission that I also did watch online. So quite a bit of information that has been shared. Alderman Straight, you had a question for Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can you just remind me, sir, the the cup has to be reviewed and reissued every year, correct? The conditional use permit? No?
Mr. Mayor and Alderman Straight, just for clarification, this is the zone change item, but the CUP, which is item 7.10, does not have to be reviewed every year. Unless there was a.
Forgive me if I'm wrong.
Perhaps the city attorney can look through that, and when we get 7.10, shed a little bit of light on the CUP on that.
My apologies, sir.
Nope, not a problem. Any other questions for Mr. Peterson at this point? Yes, Alderman Pittner.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Peterson, how many other facilities of this type or variety as far as transitional facilities do you guys operate or work in conjunction with in the community?
Yeah, Mayor Sitma, Alderman Pittner. Right now, this will be our third facility. Two are more intensive in the sense that individuals going there are recently, typically, either there by court order or it can be voluntary. We get a whole host, but they'll live there while undergoing treatment all day at North Central Human Service Center. So we have two of those facilities. They also continue that treatment in home through our supports and attending NA or AA. So we help them out with that. This is a little bit of a hybrid, but more of a transitional facility. So once graduated out of that, and as part of the North Central Human Service Center addiction case manager's plan to enter into this transitional program, which I might add, completion of an addiction treatment program, North Central does, an intensive one is almost doubles success rates, however you want to define success rate, I guess, over simple incarceration. It doubles again if they complete a transition program like this. And the cost benefit is clear and the stats are out there. And that's why these programs exist. We're really there as a nonprofit to serve the community's needs. And North Central Human Service Center, they came to us. We saw that need. We felt we could provide a service, so we decided to contract with them to provide that service.
Any further questions for Mr. Peterson at this time? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
One more time, this is a public hearing to either come forward and speak for or against the proposal that is for us. And again, the recommendation from planning is to pass the ordinance to rezone the above property that was mentioned from C1 to an R2. If not, I would look for a motion from the council. Alderman Olson.
Mr. Mayor, I move that we close the public hearing and move the item.
Second.
Motion to close the public hearing to approve the item as recommended from Alderman Olson and seconded by Alderman Pittner. Discussion on the motion. Alderman Patagula.
This is one of the things I probably should keep my mouth shut about, but it's something I'm knowledgeable about, and I've worked with individuals who've had serious problems for my entire professional career, and I think facilities and programs like this are absolutely essential, and I will be supporting the zoning change and everything that goes with it. This is the part I shouldn't say, but I've been involved with people who've set up programs like this. I've been involved in organizations that manage them, and my suggestion respectfully is next time you do this, you do it right. And that applies to everybody involved in the process. I think the first thing you do when you try to set up a program like this, besides assessing the need for it, is to work with the neighbors, to go to them, to visit with them house by house at times, to explain what you're doing and who the people who are in this facility are. They're not some sort of criminals. They're not some sort of evil people. They are people who have problems and they deserve our compassion and help. But I think the way to avoid these kinds of problems is to spend a lot of time with the community, a lot of time with the neighborhood beforehand. And we've had this happen recently. A couple of years ago, we had a facility on the near southwest I guess it's right just off of Broadway and Central facility, a home that was a single-family home that was going to be transformed into a residential facility for women with addictive disorders. And there, the people planning that spent a lot of time and effort beforehand, and certainly did at these meetings. Again, I don't want to criticize people, but I, having been, quote, in the business, close quote, I know there are better ways and worse ways of doing this. And I would respectfully recommend that next time, because there will be a next time, and there should be a next time, because there's a tremendous need for these kinds of facilities, is that the people organizing it and proposing it spend more time laying the groundwork with the neighbors so they understand. This in some ways reminds me of what happened with the Job Corps Center. The neighbors were very afraid these were going to be young juvenile delinquents and criminals and bandits coming in, and actually I think it actually made the neighborhood safer. And when the Job Corps people spent a lot of time and effort in the neighborhood, people became a little bit more accepting. As the years went by, they saw that really there was very little grounds to be so concerned. If anything, it added to the neighborhood. Again, I feel reluctant to say critical negative things, but I really think it should have been managed differently, and the neighbors could have been reassured better. Sorry.
Thank you, Alderman Patagula. Gauging by the passionate complexity of the issue, perhaps that would be a great conversation to forward on to some of our state lawmakers who, if we're just following the basics of the law, and while I can appreciate the passion of it, but if it is going to be better for the community, perhaps that could be a conversation that you could have with some state lawmakers to change what the minimal requirements would be to further that. I was also going to put in my reasoning for supporting this motion, as well as this does fall in line with the Committee on Addiction and some of the challenges that we have as a community, and also, but more so poignant to this is not going to be a surprise to the neighbors who are going to be living in those areas. I would much more feel comfortable my son riding past, which he will, on his way to a couple of his different destinations on bike, than past a couple of the houses a little farther down the street in my neighborhood. Because this one will have security, and this one will have a lot of rules and regulations in the house that he has to pass just to get beyond there. I know that they fall far outside of what the rules and regulations that these folks will be following. So I think it is going to be substantially beneficial for our community moving forward with a facility like this in that neighborhood. Alderman Wolski.
Mayor Sitma, I appreciate your comments. For historical context, I live very near to one of these other properties, and if it's any ability to put the neighborhood at ease, they've been excellent neighbors, and so I appreciate the larger need for this in the community. I appreciate our planning commission approving this item and sending it to us, as well as staff finding a way to yes on all of this. It sounds like the council is going to support this, and that is good. Oddly enough, I am not going to support this, and it is not to do with the need for the project and the quality of the project. It is to do with the land development practices of moving this particular parcel into an R2, which I think it is far more suited to the commercial use that is actually in. And so the preferred method for me addressing this would be to make this particular use as either available by right or through a conditional use permit itself. And so while I understand and appreciate the approach and the desire to get the project moving, this is I'm raising a concern against, I think, our larger zoning practices and the exclusivity that they create. It's a much bigger topic. It is a topic that we are addressing through the zoning and planning steering. In fact, these particular items have come up, and I think we're already talking about trying to make the future zoning a little less restrictive in these circumstances. But tonight I'm going to be opposing it because I think in the future it would be more beneficial to keep this property zoned as commercial.
Further discussion on the motion? Further discussion? Alderman Straight.
Mr. Mayor, I grew up right next to a facility like this. I'm going to support it tonight because I think it's I can appreciate the neighbors' concerns, but I too grew up in a neighborhood that had a facility to support individuals to get back on their feet, and I can appreciate Alderman Wolski's concerns And that's in part the question that I raised about the conditional use permit. Is my understanding based on the home in his neighborhood that if there are issues, that has to be brought before us and reauthorized every year. And so I do want the neighbors to be aware that if that is the case and I'm correct, then that is the avenue to raise this issue. But I think that this is a need and we have to fill that. And I hope in my heart that we won't have any issues, to your point, sir. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Further discussion? Seeing none, please call the roll.
Olson?
Yes.
Pittner?
Yes.
Padragula?
Yes.
Straight?
Yes.
Wolski?
No.
Sitma?
Yes.
Janser?
Yes.
Motion is approved. That takes us to 7.9, the Blaisdell Bird Edition, Lot 23 and 24, Block 13, amendment of the future land use map. The recommendation to the City Council is to adopt a resolution to amend the future land use map to acknowledge the change in zone on Blaisdell Edition Bird, Lot 23 and 24, Block 13.
So moved.
Motion by Alderman Janser to approve.
Second.
Second by Alderman Olson. Discussion on the motion. Alderman Straight.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to, I guess, if it was the previous speaker, if he was aware of the cost associated with providing the fire suppression system, for one, and if I'm on the right agenda item still.
We're one more ahead.
I'm totally off.
7.10.
My apologies.
We'll get there. Further
Lost it.
discussion on this
Jeez.
motion.
Sorry, sir.
Seeing none, please call the roll.
Janser?
Yes.
Olson?
Yes.
Pittner?
Yes.
Padragula?
Yes.
Straight?
Yes.
Wolski?
No.
Sitma?
Yes. Motion is approved. 7.10, here we go. The Blaisdell Bird Edition, Lot 23 and 24, Block 13, conditional use permit. This is the CUP. The recommendation of the City Council adopt a resolution for the conditional use permit to operate a group home providing support services and housing for individuals through a contract with North Central Human Services on a short-term basis. We also do have a handout with a further recommendation for additional requirements for the CUP for the lots described above, and require the NFPA 13D fire suppression system be installed, and to give a 60-day allowance for that installation.
So moved.
Motion by Alderman Pittner to approve.
Second.
Second by Alderman Wolski. Discussion on the motion. Yes, Ms.
Mr. Mayor.
Hendershot.
Mr. Mayor and Alderman Straight, just to answer Alderman Straight's previous question about the year renewal, that is not something that's required for a CUP in our ordinance or in any of the conditions that were recommended by the Planning Commission. There is a provision, which may be what you're thinking, that if there's no substantial construction done relating to the CUP approval in 1 year, then it's void. Or if they don't operate that way for 6 months, it's void. If there's any amendment to the activity that's occurring based on the approved CUP, that would have to come before this body and the Planning Commission, just like this application did. And also if there are issues, so for instance, if fire suppression was not put in that time frame that was requested or required, it could come back before this body for a revocation of the CUP.
Thank you for the clarification.
Thank you. And Alderman Straight, did you have a further question for the applicant regarding the fire suppression system? And
No, I'll let that go, Mr. Mayor, but
Okay.
I just have one comment about it, though.
okay, please continue then.
I think this has happened, sir, in numerous instances where there's been a bill of sale and a transfer, and then kind of later in the game, it's turned up that a fire suppression system is required. We have to look no further than the spot. And it oftentimes can become very costly and prohibitive to move forward and slow the project. So I'm not going to be surprised if a 60-day period is not going to be, if they're not going to be able to get a fire suppression system in by that point, but I'll wait and let that roll down the road, sir.
Thank you. Alderman Patagula.
For the record, I also wanted to raise concerns regarding fire safety in this facility. I've had discussions with the building and planning officials and with the fire department, and they assure me that the measures proposed are adequate in addition to a slightly lower grade, or lower, I shouldn't say this, lower capacity fire suppression system, which they tell me would be adequate, and I'll defer to their expertise. This would save the people building the building some money. They wouldn't have to install a separate water line. So I think that shows responsiveness on the part of city staff. So, you know, I've been told that it's okay, and I'm comfortable with that. I also, in my discussions, learned that the applicant did not submit a detailed set of plans for the building. They just submitted a preliminary sketch, and I think that's part of what fueled my earlier concern about the process and getting this thing going. One of the partners in this facility is the state of North Dakota through a local public agency, and if they're wanting our city staff and us to approve lots of modifications and conditional uses and things like that, I think it really is necessity that they submit detailed plans. One of the things that's going to happen to improve fire safety is a construction of an outside stairway to allow people from the second story of the building to, if there were an emergency. That plus the fire suppression system, I think, are essential. But I think to make it easier for city staff, we really do need to have detailed plans submitted. My understanding also is that the city staff will not issue an occupancy permit or a construction permit until they have those plans in hand. I know sometimes it can be expensive to put together plans when you don't know if the thing is going to go or not. But since we have an involvement of a state agency, I think we should hold them to a fairly high standard in terms of making it easier for our staff to do their job and for the public to be reassured. If I hadn't heard about the essential equivalence of the fire suppression system and the building, the new stairway, I could not have supported this. From the outside to a layperson, it looks like a fairly hazardous facility with that many people. But with those modifications and those plans, I'm okay with it.
Further discussion? Seeing none, please call the roll.
Pittner,
Yes.
Padragula,
Yes.
Straight,
Yes.
Wolski,
Yes.
Sitma,
Yes.
Janser,
Yes.
Olson.
Yes.
Motion is approved. That is the wrap on Section 7. That takes us to Section 8, the consent items. We do have, let's take a look here. We have 8.1 through 8.13 on our consent agenda. Do we have any individual items within our consent items that need to be pulled? Alderman Padragula.
7, please.
8.7 is 3rd Street Southeast. Any other items?
13 as well.
13 as well. So all items with the exception of 8.7 and 8.13. What are the wishes of the council?
I'll move the remaining items.
Motion to approve by Alderman Janser, second by Alderman Pittner. Discussion on the motion. Again, for anyone in the audience or watching at home, that we will approve as forwarded with the recommendations from staff, all items except for 8.7 and 8.13. Please call the roll.
Janser,
Yes.
Olson,
Yes.
Pittner,
Yes.
Padragula,
Yes.
Straight,
Yes.
Wolski,
Yes.
Sitma.
Yes. Motion is approved. 8.7 is the 3rd Street Southeast and Burdick Expressway, the HSIP reject of bid. City of Minot Engineering Department designed, and along with the help of the NDDOT, the Bid City Project 4426 for the second time. On Friday, October 11th, the NDDOT opened the bids, and 2 bids were received. The low bid from Strata was $161,370.65, which is $65,520.65 higher than the engineer's estimates of $95,950 and $46,923.85 lower than the Strata's first bid of $208,294.50. After reviewing the bids and contacting Strata and Main Homes, it is the engineering department's understanding that the best course of action for the city is to reject the bids and re-examine how the project can be successfully implemented. The recommendation to council is to reject the bids and authorize the engineering to re-examine the project.
So moved.
Motion by Alderman Olson. Second by Alderman Wolski. Alderman Wolski, you asked for this? No, I'm sorry, Alderman Padragula asked for this one to be pulled.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I had a couple of questions for city staff on this.
Good evening, Lance.
Good evening.
Good evening, Lance. Thank you for trying to save us money. I appreciate that. My questions are twofold. The first question I have is, if we followed your recommendation and deferred this, about how long would that delay the improvements? As I understand it, that the construction could start next year if we went ahead, but would be delayed a while if we had to come up with some other options. Could you give me a sense of how long that might take?
Certainly. Mr. Mayor, Alderman Padragula, I think what's happening here on this project is we're coming up against an overhead type of expense that we just can't get around. When we bid projects through, in this case, the DOT, it's expensive to do that because there's a lot of record keeping and requirements that the contractors have to go about, and they have to account for those costs somewhere. Versus if it's just bid through the city, we hold them to the same construction standards, but the amount of overhead required is much less. And so even though we did bid this twice and we did see an improvement in the number, that's about as low as we're going to get because Strata is subconsulting the majority of that work to a local company in Minot, Main and Homes Electric. We do have federal funds that can be obligated to this project, but up to a maximum. So if we would move forward with the project, it could start next construction season, but the city would have to come up with the funds over and above the cap. So our estimated cost share goes from something like $8,000 or $10,000 to $65,000. If we would break this project up and do parts of it incrementally over time, there may be a cost savings to the city. There's going to be some work on our part, of course, to do that. Some of the low-hanging fruit, so to speak, would be the the pedestrian signal across from the zoo. That equipment's relatively inexpensive, probably fairly easy for our own forces to do that. We may need some electrical wiring assistance from a contractor, but for the most part, we can do that portion of the project cheaper than if we would include it in this project. The work on 3rd Street, unfortunately, it started out as a pedestrian signal improvement project, but it turned into an ADA improvement project. And what ended up happening there is in order to move the pedestrian signals to where they need to be and put the push buttons to where they need to be to meet the ADA compliance, we have to go into reconstructing sidewalks and lowering a portion of the county's parking lot. And so those costs get to be quite expensive. And when you put them in a small DOT project like this, that's where we're losing some of those funds. We could pick away at that over time with some of our city maintenance type of projects. What's probably a better course of action for us is to try to include that pedestrian signal project in either a reconstruction or a major rehabilitation of 3rd Street here in the next few years. We'd have to wait some time to incorporate that project, but then that overhead costs get spread among a lot of other bid items. It's an 80-20 cost share, so we still get those federal funds involved. In that case, we're probably money ahead, but we'd have to wait a few years before that project is implemented. I think what this really comes down to is how fast we want those improvements to be made. Are we okay with delaying them a few years? If so, then let's try to package that together in another DOT project. If we feel that the community need is there and we need to do that project next year, then we can accept this bid, find the additional funding that we would need to support our local cost share and move forward. So the answer is next year or several years down the road or some combination in between. We can do just about anything.
Could we at least get the pedestrian flashing signal done next year?
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Padragula, I think the pedestrian signal at the zoo is a very doable project for us for next year in 2020. If we would want to move forward with the 3rd Street improvements, then I think our best course of action would be to award this bid and pay the additional costs.
I'm sorry, I'm still not clear. If we wanted could we follow your recommendation and defer this and yet get the signal improvement done next year?
We could. We'd have to bid out another project. We'd probably have to do that locally with just city funds. We'd have to forego the federal cost share then if we would do something like that, unless we would award this contract.
But I'm sorry, I thought you said we could do it with city staffing with the help of a local electrical contractor on our own.
Mr. Mayor and Alderman Padragula, there's two sections of this bid. Okay, there's the work on Third Street. Okay, that's a phase. And then there's another phase that's tied to this for the signal on Burdick Expressway across from the zoo. So we can't award one without
Oh, I'm sorry.
the other.
Okay. Thank you.
Further questions for our city engineer? Alderman Janser.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Lance, remind me, the Third Street improvements, is this not the project where there was considerable concern about a safety issue relative to folks going across? I think that's what was the impetus for this to begin with. And I guess I just want to remind folks that, this was brought to us, I believe, as a concerned parent with an issue, for people trying to cross there. And so, I guess I, for one, am not particularly excited about delaying an action there for 2 or 3 more years. I just don't find that acceptable. So I'm not going to vote in favor of the current motion.
Alderman Pittner.
Thank you, Mayor. I find myself falling somewhat in line with Alderman Janser's way of thinking, that this is maybe falling in line with a safety issue when we have maybe a higher demand put on that area with the Ward County building, with the courthouse, with the Ward County library, with the school still downtown. And I guess maybe I have a question for Lance too. Lance, I know we're talking about cost savings, maybe delaying. What are the cost implications of inflation and whatnot? And I know you don't have a crystal ball of possibly delaying this a few years as far as the cost of doing business, construction costs, maybe delaying this. Is there a risk that we face with that? Maybe it might cost us an additional $55,000 right now, today, but the project might cost that much 2-3 years from now anyway.
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Pittner, that it's hard to pinpoint that exactly because it depends on the scope of that Third Street project. We know that we're going to have to replace the traffic signal at Third Street and Central. So there's some synergies there between that contractor and that amount of work. You're ordering more controllers and equipment and those sort of things. So there could be some cost savings. But in general, you're correct. I mean, over time, the material prices of any construction item will increase. And it's usually around that 2.5% to 3% is what we see.
Lance, is there any portion of this, if it were to progress forward and having to come up with that additional funding, would we lose some of those, I guess, savings or sacrifice some of those dollars when we come to the Third Street reconstruction project in the not-too-distant future?
Forgive me, Mayor.
Sacrifice by mean losing, having to tear it up and redo it.
There is that risk. We thought about that. Depending on the scale of that project, there may be some concrete that goes in that would have to be replaced. The traffic signal poles that have that pedestrian flasher on it, they're in decent shape. They're going to be approaching 40 years old, but they're not to the point that give us great concern. So likely they could be saved and then we work around them. But there could be components that have to be removed and replaced in a few years. That is a risk.
Thank you, Lance. Any further questions for our city engineer, Alderman Wolski?
I appreciate the depth of this conversation and the challenge that comes with this and the pedestrian concerns. Lance, question for you is, are there any low-cost guerrilla tactics that we can use maybe over the next couple of years if we do end up rejecting this? Some temporary signage or something that we can sit there to try and call extra attention to pedestrian concerns and safety in that area?
Mr. Mayor and Alderman Wolski, I think enhanced striping is low-hanging fruit. I think enhancing the parking restrictions around that crosswalk, that's relatively low-hanging fruit. That does mean that the county will lose some operational flexibility during that time, but I guess that's the trade-off for public safety. So those items are relatively inexpensive. We're talking about a few $1,000 improvement to do that, and by the time that enhanced striping would wear off, we're probably ready to either reconstruct or grind that corridor. So the timing of that would probably work. We just have to let the county know that they may have some operational challenges in front of that building in the meantime.
Lance and Alderman Wolski, there is one other item that wasn't addressed yet, and that is the ability for this council to double the fine for failure to yield for a pedestrian, given the state law that did change. However, we have also recognized a potential challenge to that law. But
Sure.
that is also an option.
I appreciate that alternative, Mayor Sitma. I guess my perspective would be that would be very little consolation if somebody got hit. And so I think I'm all for probably exploring all of those things, but yeah, I just wanted to share that comment.
Further questions for our city engineer? Alderman Pittner.
Thank you, Mayor. Lance, just one question, and maybe this would be a question for Stefan, but I find myself, I drive this corridor every day, taking my kids to and from daycare. In the mornings, I find it much more effective crossing Burdick, when pedestrians cross Burdick and there's a light that illuminates from a button that's pushed, versus maybe 3rd Street, which I feel is just illuminated all the time. Maybe becomes white noise for drivers that drive that corridor on a daily basis, especially in the morning. Now we see it's dark outside, or in the evenings when it's dark where people are getting off of work. Is there any, out of curiosity, is there any studies that show what's more effective, whether it be a constantly flashing light or something that's illuminated from a button push? Just curious.
Mr. Mayor and Alderman Pittner, it's hands down, far and away more effective to have a pedestrian actuated push button system, which is not what we have today. It's just continually in yellow flash. And as part of these improvements, the system that we have now would be changed out for pedestrian actuated, and it's called a rectangular rapid flash beacon. So it flashes yellow and white strobe that catches the driver's attention. So there'd be flashing beacons up above and then on the midpoint of the signal pole. So it would take care of that issue, but in order to do that, we have to swap out the equipment, and that participates in what we're trying to do with this project. And so just to move forward with the equipment without doing the buttons doesn't really do much for you. But then to do the buttons, we have to do the 88 improvements, so it just kind of spirals, and that's where we're at.
Further questions for our city engineer? Thank you, Lance.
You're welcome.
So we do have a motion to approve and a second with the recommendations to reject the bids and authorize the engineers to re-examine the project. That re-examination could also be, I would fundamentally guess, either a guerrilla tactic, as Alderman Wolski had put it, and some low-hanging fruit, or another means rather than what is presented before us tonight. Alderman Pondergula.
I was really pleased with the plans that the city staff, the traffic people put together and the engineering people put together originally. And they seem clever, and they've already saved us a bunch of money in terms of the prime bid. They saved us, what, $46,000. And I know one thing leads to another, but I'm very concerned about the safety of this intersection, and I have been for many, many, many years, if not decades. This was brought home to me last week when I served as an expert witness in a trial at the county courthouse, and I spent 3 days going across that street back and forth. And when there are 4 lanes of traffic coming at you, I think a $15 ticket for not heeding a crosswalk is not going to be much deterrent. I think it's just a safety issue. I would like I'm willing to give the engineering people more time to look at the project and how far we have to go. But I really, really personally would like to see an improvement with the signal system for the pedestrians next year. And I'm not content waiting several years. I think it's just too much of a risk. We've been dealing with this for years, if not decades. I think we need to act. With all the other improvements, yeah, I'm willing to wait on that. But it sounds like Alderman Walski's suggestion of guerrilla tactics, is worth pursuing. But I really do want a light next year, so I'm not going to be supporting this in terms of rejecting the bids.
Further discussion on the motion? Further discussion? Again, the motion is to reject the bids and authorize the engineering to re-examine the project. Please call the roll.
Olson?
Yes.
Pittner?
No.
Padragula?
No.
Straight?
No.
Wolski?
Yes.
Sitma?
Yes.
Janser?
No.
So the motion fails. We have another option then in front of us for a motion, in the form of a motion then. If not, a motion to perhaps push till next council meeting is an option. Alderman Padragula.
I'd like to move that we direct city staff to move forward with putting a pedestrian actuated traffic signal in there next year, and to ask them to take the time to figure out what other tactics might be useful to buy us some time until the street gets reconstructed.
Alderman Padragula, we still do have to do something about the bid that is before us. And Lance, that would be rejecting the bids that are before us, correct?
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Padragula, if you're intent on installing that work next year, then my recommendation is to award the bid to Strata and pay the additional dollars.
Okay. Then I would alter what I just said and go with what Lance suggested and recommend awarding of the bid.
We have a motion to award the bid. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Alderman Pittner. Alderman Padragula, or perhaps maybe this is a question for Lance, in the terms of the overage on the bid of the $65,520.65, or for our finance director, in terms of the funding mechanism, where would those dollars be coming from?
Mr. Mayor, we could take that funding either from general fund reserves or one of the sales tax reserves categories. We do have some funding available, and also we have some money that's set aside in special projects. We would have to bring a budget amendment to the next council meeting to approve that.
Thank you. Further questions, Alderman Janser.
I guess, in some cases, you can get a better price, and then there's times where you just have to accept that you have to spend the money. And I would love to save $65,000. Many times you have heard me move to accept the lowest bid because it saves money. But we've done this twice. It isn't like this is our first attempt to get this down to a cost that was estimated. But we've also had instances in the past where sometimes the engineering estimate isn't quite high enough. And, these people shaved off 47 grand from their original bid. And, I don't think there's any guarantee that I have no doubt that Lance and the staff worked well with these contractors to achieve that. But I think there are times where you have to pay what the work is going to cost. And I believe this is one of those times.
Further discussion on the motion to award the bid. Alderman Wolski.
Mayor Sim, I saw our traffic engineer approach, and I was curious if there were any additional comments.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Mayor Simmer, Alderman Wolski. I just wanted to point out to Lance the estimated cost share that we would ultimately have to share. That's all I had.
Further discussion on the motion to approve the bids that is before us this evening. If not, please call the roll.
Padragula.
Yes.
Straight.
Yes.
Wolski.
No.
Sitma.
No.
Janser.
Yes.
Olson.
Yes.
Pittner.
Yes.
Motion is approved. That takes us to 8.13. This is the wastewater treatment facility hydraulic improvements, final payment for the project number 4202. In 2014, the Apex Engineering completed a wastewater treatment facility study for the city of Minot. In that study, Apex identified some hydraulic improvements that are necessary to alleviate the deficiencies in the piping to the stabilization ponds. The improvements will allow for better conveyance of our current wastewater flows and provide some additional capacity for future growth and development. The project was bid in January of 16, and the low bidder was Wagner Construction, Inc. at $5,968,520. Wagner Construction has now completed all the items remaining for the project. The recommendation is to approve the final payment of $355,397.32 to Wagner Construction.
So moved.
Motion by Alderman Janser, second by Alderman Wolski. Discussion, Alderman Wolski.
Mayor Sitma, question/comment. I'm sure this will be for Mr. Jonason and Dan. If you have an answer, great. If not, I'm happy to take it offline at a later date too. But given sort of the complexity of this project and the uniqueness of our wastewater treatment plant, I'm just curious as to how do we evaluate whether this project has been a success, and do we have the means to really evaluate whether this is working to the degree our consultant suggested it would?
Good evening, Dan.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, Alderman Wolski. Basically, what this project did was it upsized the piping from our aeration ponds to our lagoons so that we can transfer, we have the ability to transfer the waste after it goes through the aeration cycle. We were limited by the size, so we couldn't get the 6, 7, 8 million gallons a day that we need to through that. So a lot of times we were either bypassing and trying to go directly to the lagoons, which isn't ideal. We need to have it go through our aeration ponds. So by upsizing this pipe, we went from a 24-inch pipe up to a 36-inch pipe. It gave us the capacity to get that there so we can do the proper treatment through the cells and through our wetlands. So I think that alone shows the success of it.
It's already working in a sense then?
Yes, correct.
Any further questions for our Public Works Director? Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
Further discussion on the motion? Further discussion? Please call the roll.
Janser.
Yes.
Olson.
Yes.
Pittner.
Yes.
Padragula.
Yes.
Straight.
Yes.
Wolski.
Yes.
Sitma.
Yes. Motion is approved. Moving on to our action items section of our agenda. 9.1 is the 31st Avenue Southeast Reconstruction Cost Participation and Maintenance Agreement, item number 4331. The 31st Avenue Southeast corridor has been scheduled for reconstruction through the NDDOT Urban Roads Program. The City Council has selected an engineer, held public input in several project design alternatives. The CPM agreement is the standard agreement generated by the NDDOT to dedicated federal funds to the city to pay for the federal share of the project. The recommendation of the council is to approve the CPM agreement with the NDDOT and authorize the mayor to sign the agreement.
So moved.
Motion by Alderman Olson to approve.
Second.
Second by Alderman Pittner. Any discussion on the item? Any discussion? Seeing none, please call the roll.
Olson?
Yes.
Pittner?
Yes.
Padragula?
Yes.
Straight?
Yes.
Wolski?
Yes.
Sitma?
Yes.
Janser?
Yes.
Motion is approved. 9.2 is the wastewater hydraulic improvements, contract amend project number 4202. Contract documents for the wastewater treatment facility hydraulic improvement project as amended by change orders 1 and 2 called for substantial completion of the project by December 4th, 2018, with final to follow by January 1 of 19. The project was ultimately substantially completed on January 18th, 2019, and final completion was granted on September 10th, 2019. Apex Engineering provided the construction, observation, and contract administration beyond the original completion timeline, which resulted in additional engineering costs. This contract amendment covers the additional costs incurred due to the late completion of the project. The recommendation from council is to approve the recommendation to council is to approve the contract amendment with Apex Engineering in the amount of $51,875 for the wastewater hydraulic improvement project and authorize the mayor to sign the documents. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Motion by Alderman Olson to approve. Is there a second? Second by Alderman Janser. Discussion. Alderman Janser.
I guess maybe a question for Dan or whoever. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Dan, so it looks like this ran about 5 or 6 weeks late, and the additional money is about $52,000. I mean, is that kind of what that contract was over time, or how's that number arrived at, I guess, is maybe my question.
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Janser, actually, the project was supposed to be complete in December or January of 2019, and it wasn't completed until September 10th. Everything closed out, all the punch list items and everything like that. So it's about an additional 9 months of time. And there were liquidated damages assessed to the contractor in excess of this amount.
Okay, and that was going to be my other question, is where the funds were coming from. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.
All right. Any further questions for our Public Works Director? Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
Any further discussion on the motion? Further discussion? Seeing none, please call the roll.
Olson?
Yes.
Pittner?
Yes.
Padragula?
Yes.
Straight?
Yes.
Wolski?
Yes.
Sitma?
Yes.
Janser?
Yes.
Motion is approved. 9.3, the Mouse River Enhanced Flood Protection Project Phase 1, BU-1, the Burlington Levee Project, providing flood risk reduction for Burlington is part of the overall Mouse River Plan. Replacement of the bridge will improve the conveyance at the crossing. The project was initially programmed to be part of the Burlington Levee Project. However, when the bid prices for Phase 1, 2, and 3 in Minot came in below budget, some of those funds were reprogrammed to advance the other phases of the Mouse River Plan. The recommendation to council is to approve the plan and specifications and recommended the approval to the SRJB for bidding the levee project in Burlington, Phase BU-1 for the Mouse River Enhanced Flood Protection Project, and recommend the council approve the reimbursement resolution.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Alderman Wolski, second by Alderman Straight. Discussion on the motion. Alderman Wolski.
Mayor Sitma, brief comment. This is a basin-wide project. The city has been committed to achieving a basin-wide project from the very beginning, and here we are holding our commitment to that end. And so this is a significant improvement for the folks out in Burlington, one that is very much needed, and I'm happy to support it.
Thank you, Alderman Wolski. Alderman Straight.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a quick announcement that I see Mr. Ackerman in the audience, and the Service River Joint Board meets Thursday at 4 p.m. in the auditorium. And if you haven't been to a SRJB meeting to get an update on this massive project, it's always enlightening. Thank you, sir.
Absolutely. The point that was made several times during the legislature, including what Alderman Wolski had talked about with the basin-wide commitment by the city, which is also the substantial, I think, reasoning why it has been highly successful with our partners upstream and downstream with this project compared to, let's say, the projects of yesteryear or others that are struggling perhaps in other places and other projects. Further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, please call the roll.
Wolski?
Yes.
Sitma?
Yes.
Janser?
Yes.
Olson?
Yes.
Pittner?
Yes.
Padragula?
Yes.
Straight.
Yes.
Motion is approved. That takes us to number 10, personal appearances on our agenda. We still have a few people in the audience. This is an opportunity for anyone to come forward on any item that is not on our agenda for this evening. Again, this would be an opportunity for anyone in the audience to come forward and speak on any item that is not on our agenda. All right. That takes us to number 11. This is the miscellaneous and discussion items. We do have one item that is listed. 11.1, the amendment to the CMCO Section 5-8, license to close at certain times. It was requested by council that Section 5.8 of the Minot City Code of Ordinances be amended to allow for on sale of alcohol on Thanksgiving Day. Going on a limb, Alderman Wolski.
Moving the ordinance change. So moved.
Second.
Motion by Alderman Wolski, second by Alderman Straight. Discussion.
Mayor
Alderman
Sitma,
Wolski.
actually, I did not bring this, remarkably. But I see Mr. Lacaduke in the audience, and I wonder if he might have any comment.
If you would, for the record, John, just say your name and address and affiliation.
It is John Lacaduke, 717 6th Street Southwest, and I am the owner-operator of Saul's and the Tap Room downtown Minot.
Good evening, sir. Any comments or discussion on the item?
This was just an attempt by myself and the council members I reached out to bring Minot Code of Ordinance into line with state law, with the exception of the 2 a.m. closing.
Okay. Further questions for Mr. Lacaduke? I should say, any questions for Mr. Lacaduke? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Discussion by Council Alderman Pittner.
Thank you, Mayor. I was actually the one who asked for this agenda.
My apologies, Alderman Pittner. It won't happen
Take my credit
again.
where credit is due, I guess, not to take maybe the spotlight off of Alderman Wolski, but I think this is just an opportunity to shore up our ordinance, fall in line with state, and let our business owners decide when they close in line with the state. I don't think it's necessary that we be more restrictive than the state, and it just, no one's forcing anyone to be open on Easter or Thanksgiving. It just gives them the option, so.
Let's see, Ms. Hendershot, you have something to add.
Mr. Mayor, we received the request to amend this to take the on-sale option out for Thanksgiving Day, but there is also a prohibition for Easter Day, which is not a requirement of state law. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear for the council when you're voting on this, that this is only eliminating Thanksgiving Day, but not
Easter.
So,
Thank you for that clarification on law in regards to state law. Alderman Wolski.
Mayor Sitma, maybe a question for our city attorney here. But if this passes on first reading tonight, do we still have the ability on second reading to amend or make changes?
Mr. Mayor and Alderman Wolski, yes, the city council can make any changes at any time prior to second reading.
Okay. Mayor Sitma, I would follow that up with
Yes, Alderman Wolski.
a comment here, which is, I want this to move forward tonight, so I'm going to support it as is right now. But over the next couple weeks, I think this is a worthy time to have a conversation. The 2 a.m. closing law itself, which the city does not use right now, the city is stricter. We go to 1 a.m. This is if this moves forward tonight and we have a second reading, there's an opportunity to revisit that on amendment a couple weeks from now, and I wanted to introduce that topic as something for the community conversation over the next couple weeks. And I would be prepared to offer that as an amendment in a couple weeks from now if this moves tonight.
Alderman Padragula.
In anticipation of that being offered as an amendment, I would respectfully ask our police chief to be prepared at that time to give the perspective of the law enforcement community. I'm certainly try to be a libertarian with most issues, but I don't know. Just in advance. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Padragula. Alderman Janser.
In anticipation of that potential amendment, it seems to me like not that long ago, we had a rather arduous and protracted committee discussion with the liquor establishment owners and people directly involved with this. I think there was an alderman at the time who was part of that group, and he may remember some of that or have some comments, but it just strikes me that I think to keep going back to the same thing over and over again because it didn't turn out the way somebody wanted it to isn't productive. So I guess that's my comment or caution, maybe.
Thank you,
Mr. Mayor.
Alderman Janser. Alderman Olson.
It would be helpful if we could have notes or meeting notes or something from the
2016.
Exactly, if that's when it was. I know it wasn't too long ago, and I do remember several meetings, and I do remember several business owners coming before us, and we went along with their preference at that time. So just to have kind of a, I don't know, bring back the memories, a little bit of a refresher so that we would know. I don't think it's advantageous to spend weeks and weeks discussing this.
Alderman Olson, I would agree. There was a substantial amount of time that, at that time, Alderman Schuler and myself as an alderman spent with the liquor license owners, bar owners, and other folks. And it was at that time a little bit split, but in the end, it was the bar owners and liquor license owners that did stand and had requested that it not change for a variety of reasons. Perhaps that we can dig back and just take a look at some of those meeting notes and disseminate them out to the council prior to next meeting. Just to review that, I will hold my prolonged, comments until such time, and perhaps maybe even Mr. Lakaduck and some of the other bar owners and liquor license owners can have some of their own other items prepared for discussion, not items, but comments prepared at that point as well. Further discussion? Any further discussion on this item? Again, this is for the changing for Thanksgiving, as the recommendation before you is not on the Easter sales. Please call the roll.
Wolski?
Yes.
Sitma?
Yes.
Dancer?
Yes.
Olson?
Yes.
Pittner?
Yes.
Padragula?
Yes.
Straight.
Yes.
Motion is approved. That is the remainder of our miscellaneous and discussion items. That does take us to our very last item on the agenda, adjournment.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion by Alderman Janser, second by Alderman Pittner. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. We're adjourned.